Welcome to today's segment of Ask an Attorney, brought to you by Peter Morgan with Morgan Law. This is Peter Morgan. I'm an attorney with Morgan Law, and today's topic is going to be surveys. Along with title searches, surveys are one of the most important items we have in sort of our toolkit to assist buyers who are thinking about purchasing a piece of property. The reason surveys are so important is attorneys, of course, do not actually go out to the property that is being sold, and really the surveyors are our eyes on what's going on actually with the physical condition of the property. Bear in mind, when we use our other major tool, which is a title search, we are merely looking at things which are public records, such as tax records or records which are at the Register of Deeds. And items which are typically what we call matters of survey would not be on tax records necessarily, or on items that you would find such as a deed in the Register of Deeds. So it's a really important tool to show us exactly what's going on with the property itself, how it's situated, things that are built on the property. So typically when I'm reviewing a survey, there are a couple of things that I'm going to be looking at that are important for the buyer to know about. The first item would be what we call encroachments. So encroachments are a situation where there is something that originates on a neighbor's adjoining property, which then crosses over the boundary line with the property that's being purchased. A good example, probably the most typical example, would be a fence. So a fence encroachment would be a situation where the fence that originates on the neighbor's property crosses over my client's property. Now, why is that a concern? The principal reason that's a concern is simply that there could be some argument about ownership of the portion of the client's property is somehow being claimed by the neighbor, right? So asserting ownership through that fence, through what we call adverse possession. So that is always something when I see it. When I see an encroachment, I notify the real estate agent involved, if there is one, or the client directly. And usually that is something that does not actually interfere with a sale if it's handled properly. A very common and perhaps the best way to handle that in most circumstances would actually be through an encroachment agreement, which is simply an agreement between the neighbor and the owner of the property that has the fence on it, basically confirming that the neighbor's not claiming ownership of the property and they can continue to maintain the fence as long as it's still in good condition. And then at some point, if it starts to deteriorate, it can be removed. So that's a common sort of encroachment that you might run into, and again, not a deal breaker in most instances, but something that is important to report. So encroachments are one important thing that you can see from a survey. Another thing I'm commonly looking at would be what are called setbacks. So setbacks essentially are the boundary lines in which a primary structure can be erected, right? So when you think about where your house is on your property, it needs to be a certain number of feet from the boundary lines. Usually your building envelope, as we call it, is sort of determined by zoning. Also in some cases there may be deed or neighborhood restrictions which also have setback requirements. So the biggest concern I would have with respect to setbacks would be if there was an actual setback violation, meaning that there's some part of the house that is actually in the area where it's not supposed to be. It's closer to a lot line than it's supposed to be, and that can be a matter of concern. It depends on the source of the setback, how long the house has been there, and a lot of other factors. So again, not necessarily a deal breaker in itself, but definitely something that needs to be further investigated and discussed as to how it's going to impact on that particular sale. I'd say probably the third and final thing that I'm normally looking at when I'm looking at surveys would be the location of easements. Easements are important to know about because they impact on how the property owner can use the property that is subject to the easement. In residential, the residential situation, basically you'd be looking at probably two primary types of easements. One of them would be rights of way, which are associated with roads, and so anytime you have a public road, public street that runs directly in front of your house, there's going to be a public right of way associated with that. The other common type would be utility easements. So for example, if there are power lines near the property, underground water or sewage pipes underneath the property, those types of utilities have easements associated with them. And what that simply means is that the holder of the easement, being the utility company or the city of Charlotte, whoever it might be, that gives them the right to come upon the property to do whatever is reasonably necessary to maintain whatever is it's there for its intended purpose. So, for example, if there's a a water drainage pipe and for some reason it's not working properly, whoever has that easement has the right to come onto the property, dig it up, and fix it, and then put everything back the way it was. If the property owner has something of value within that easement, then essentially they don't have any recourse if it gets torn up, if it's interfering with the reasonable use of whatever the easement was granted for. So that's always good to know, obviously. You don't want to put really valuable landscaping or a structure that you care something about in an easement, because you do always subject it to that risk that the easement holder could come back later on and have to dig something up or otherwise damage it, and you've just been without recourse. So to sort of summarize, surveys, again, are an important tool that we have in sort of our toolkit to assist buyers. I always recommend that people get surveys where possible. A possible exception that might be new construction, or if you're dealing with a condominium or a townhome, those are kind of special cases, but anytime you're dealing with a single family residence, I recommend getting a survey. And among the things that we'd be looking for on surveys would be whether there are any encroachments, and also whether there might be any type of easement that would be on the property. And of course, we're checking for setbacks as well, making sure that that primary structure is where it's supposed to be in relation to what zoning says. That concludes today's segment of Ask an Attorney, brought to you by Peter Morgan with Morgan Law. I hope you found today's video informative and enjoyable. For more information, please consult my website below or see the contact information at the end of this video.